introduction of our speaker. All right, Kathy Kehoe. It's always nice to have a board member. We're very blessed to have Kathy. Obviously, we're blessed to have all of our board members, but you know, we get that awesome newsletter. A lot of those great stories is because of Kathy. We've had other people that have written some in the past, but most of it's Kathy. And she's been working on this book for quite a while, but it turned out just so awesome. It was quite a treasure. And of course, when they had the book signing up there at the Visitor Center, it was just a great turnout. We appreciate Dennis, okay, of course, writing the forward in it. And so they were up there signing their arms away. It was so busy that day, but it was just great. So we got a great end product here, great images. She spent a lot of time on it, well written. And like I said, Kathy, we're so blessed to have her when it comes to sharing the stories of Strasburg. I know people have already asked when's volume 2 coming out. It's one of those things, again, the more that you share, okay, the more pictures and things you find, that's what makes volume 2, and then volume 3, etc. So I can't emphasize enough, share things with us, because that's what we're all about, is telling those stories. So, Kathy, it's all yours, and we appreciate you being here. Our daughter Bridget's here helping out. So.
Yes. Thank goodness she is here. She says that I have to say a lot of things about my writing and about myself, and I feel like that's bragging, but she insists. But anyway, every picture tells a story, and it certainly did in this book. And what I've done here is just try to highlight some of the pictures and some of the stories that went along with the pictures during the making of the book, and also after the book came out, I found out some other information. So I just want to welcome everybody here. I think most of you here today know me, and that I've been writing about Strasburg for over 20 years in our newsletter. I grew up in Strasburg and have never lived more than a few miles outside of town. Putting this book together was a lot of work, but I loved how people shared their family photographs and brought them to me to scan. If you haven't read the folk histories that Tim was talking about in our newsletters, you can find them on our website. I think we have some of our newsletters in the back for people who haven't seen them, they can pick them up. And our website is www.strasburgvaheritage.org. So I wanted to mention that. The story behind the story, Gloria Stickley was asked to do this book originally, and she was involved in a book about the Lutheran Church with Reverend Hall, so she asked me to do it. And I dedicated this book to Gloria. And I just want to read you the dedication that's in the book. This book is dedicated to Gloria Stickley. She was a writer, a retired school librarian, president and board member of the Strasburg Museum, and a true historian. Dedicated to collecting, preserving, and sharing our local history. In our first meeting about this book, she said to me, "I'm older than you are, and I may not be here when the book is finished." Gloria passed away in September 2021, but I believe she was by my side, still mentoring and guiding me. Many times, stuck on the wording of a caption and wishing she were here, an idea would come to mind, I think, because she was whispering in my ear. My inspiration came from Lois Lane and Doug Cooley and Virginia Cadden. When I was 10 years old, I wanted to grow up to be Lois Lane, girl reporter from reading comic books. I love Superman comic books. The story of Strasburg that Virginia Hinkins Cadden wrote, this is my original book from the 4th grade. Students at Strasburg Elementary School studied Virginia history in the 4th grade. This was my book. I was in 4th grade in 1964. It was first printed in 1961 in honor of the town's bicentennial celebrating 200 years since the founding of the town. My husband Mike has his book also, only he was in the 7th grade in 1961, the year the book was printed, so he studied town history in the 7th grade. But we both have our original books of the story of Strasburg. The Heritage Association did reprint this book a few years ago, and we've run completely out of them. So we're in the process of thinking about how we could reprint that book. And then Doug Cooley, this is a picture of one of his books, My Strasburg, and he wrote a lot of his memories about Strasburg as well. So he was another mentor of mine. There were rules, formats, and contracts. Arcadia Publishing requested Gloria Stickley, president of Strasburg Museum, to do an Images of America book on Strasburg. But she was in the middle of the book on the Lutheran Church. So she asked me, because I had been writing folk history of Strasburg, and I was ready to retire from my job as a case manager. I had to submit a proposal, my writing resume, and sign a contract with Arcadia. Sorry, I'm not used to this mic. Yeah. So a little bit about me, because Bridget insists. I wrote for school publications and for our church newsletter, and once in the 1980s, a local magazine called Novascope published an article that I wrote. I was paid $35, but they completely rewrote it and never asked me to submit another article. So I was kind of disappointed about that, but that was the first time I ever made any actual money from writing. I was co-editor of a church newsletter in the early 80s, and I wrote a humorous column. Actually, that was, I lived and went to church in Fisher's Hill, and I invented a character named Hildy Fishers, who spent a lot of time outside at her clothesline where the neighbors would stop to chat, walking to get the mail at Doc Rittenhauer's grocery. Hildy wrote a column in the church newsletter about all the news she acquired from the neighborhood. About the same time, Garrison Keeler, the supreme folklorist, had invented a town called Lake Wobegon. Keeler became famous with his radio show on public radio called Prairie Home Companion. He was another of my mentors. In the late 1980s, I wrote a column called Country Kitchen for a weekly newspaper interviewing Shenandoah County residents. The only other writing job I was ever paid for. I made $25 a column. In 2001, I published a newsletter for the Strasburg Heritage Association, which included articles written by local authors, Virginia Cadden and Doug Cooley. When their health prevented them from being contributing writers, I wrote my first folk history. Since then, I've interviewed and written down the memories of many local people, preserving their memories in our folk histories. So the next slide.
So she didn't say that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I did practice this. When I wrote the introduction, Arcadia said I couldn't use personal pronouns. I explained that, hey, I write folk history. This is my style of writing, and I know my audience. So the editor ran it by the production team, and they decided it was okay. I could use personal pronouns. So that was how the introduction went. Okay, on the scanning, I learned always to use your sense of humor.
Yeah.
Especially the Kehoe sense of humor. Scanning is drudgery. It takes about 5 minutes per picture to scan, save, and get notes for captions. Scanning meetings were fun, and people love sharing and talking about the photos. My friend Patty nicknamed the book the damn book because whenever she asked me what I was doing, I said, working on a damn book. It was a long time, it seemed like. Actually, I said a lot of bad words, and if I was home alone, I said them loudly. Then I had to apologize to my cats. The museum collection Gloria thought I could get all the pictures I needed from the museum, from Doug Cooley's collection, and I had to meet with Gloria to sign pictures out of the library to loan them, for me to, borrow them. And then I had to bring them back, and then after I scanned them. Some of the museum photos were not acceptable by the publishing company. The museum is closed from October till May, so I had to make appointments to gather photos. Then the pandemic happened and the museum was closed for a year, so I had to have mask wearing meetings to get photos and return them. Originally, the plan was for me to do the scanning and then Gloria and I would write the captions together. But Gloria passed away before that. I wrote the captions with the help of fellow SHA board members, books written about Strasburg, like Strasburg, Virginia and the Keister family, and Virginia Cadden and Doug Cooley, and past SHA folk histories and oral history that came from our website. So the special format, the photos had to be scanned in a special format, had to be TIF 300 DPI or 600 DPI if the photos were small. And what we figured that was dots per inch. Dots per inch. It has to do with the clarity of the picture. This meant that I couldn't use some of the pictures I already had from writing the folk histories because I had to have the original picture to scan. I also bought a new scanner that Arcadia recommended when I started the scanning process. The scanning meetings were a lot of fun. George was one of the people that brought pictures from his family photo albums, and so was I saw Ginger Saker Gladding was at some of the scanning parties, and Mary, yes, and Mary Ellen Wade brought me a lot of pictures, and they were very interesting. Once I had scanned all the museum photos, I scheduled scanning meetings at the Strasburg Library and at the box office brewery. They let me use that little room to the side. I set up my laptop and scanner, and people brought family photos for me to scan, along with notes about each of the pictures. So, old pictures tell new stories. This was a really interesting picture. It's actually in the book, it's on page 118. On the back of this photo was written one name, was Alfred Racy. The other dancers were not identified. However, after the book was published, I talked to Kitty Miller and Pat Pingley Stryker, who recognized themselves and both identified the second boy. So on the left, dancing in the skirt and sweater is Kitty Morris Miller, dancing with Alfred Racy. The couple on the right is Pat Pingley Stryker, dancing with Billy Freed. But that was just, I like these little connections, where you find things out later that you couldn't find out before. And I have a lot of pictures in there on the limestone quarry, and I know George's grandfather worked there at the junction. And here's the Kehoe sense of humor again. When my husband Mike proofed the captions for the Kimstone pictures, he said, "Why don't you let me write these captions for you?" He said, "You make it sound like Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble worked there." I said, "Yes, please help me with these captions." I think this is the oldest picture in the book. This actually came from Ginger Sager Gladding, and this came from retired teacher Francis Hoover's collection. On the back was written before 1914. So this is a town parade, which I believe is maybe going down Queen Street. You can't really tell. Notice the man in front riding the white horse appears to be wearing a Civil War Confederate uniform. Behind him is a marching band. These men are likely veterans of the Civil War, a war that ended some 50 years earlier. Oh, by the way, if you have any comments or questions while we're going through this, feel free to ask. I meant to say that at the beginning. On the cover, who are the women? Arcadia wanted to know the names of the 3 women on the cover. Well, I didn't pick this to be on the cover. They asked me to send them 7 to 10 pictures of what I would like to see on the cover of the book. So I didn't send them this picture, but they didn't like the pictures that I sent them. I wanted the picture, the very first picture in the book is Reverend Homemaker. He's blessing the wheat with the Mr. and Mrs. Beeler, with the Massanutten Mountain behind him. That's what I wanted on the cover, but they liked all the detail of People's Drugstore. Then
It's Reverend Haymaker.
Reverend Haymaker, but it's with H-A, maker, right? It's spelled, right, okay. Pronounced Haymaker, but spelled H-A. Well, anyway, after they wanted this on the cover, then they wanted to know who the 3 women were. Well, I didn't know. So after it was published, I was told the women are believed to be, the first one, Janet Hammond. Is that, Larry, is that Shug Renner's daughter? Shug? Sister? Shug Renner's sister, okay. So we found out a little bit about that. We didn't know about the middle person, but Carol Estep did come today and look at the picture, and it is, he says, and he and Linda Williams figured out it was his mother. Yeah, that was pretty interesting. Her name was Suzanne Smith Estep. So that's Carol Estep's mom. And on the right, we think is Sophie Zay. Do we have that first name right? Does anybody know? Okay, Sophie Zay. So that was just one of the things I found out after the book was published. And this you'll see more in the captions when you look at the book. This was also on page 36.
Kathy, did you know the people in the background of that picture?
No. Now, if you look at the picture closely, there's 2 men in the very back. But I haven't found out. But maybe now, if the book has come out, we might find that out too. This is a story that is actually in our latest newsletter, which is Winter 2023, which is on our website. This was a story, My Father's Rake, by John P. Painter. He wrote about his father, Eugene Punk Painter. Mr. Painter had a printing shop out on A Street, which is now Ash Street. Johnny took this picture of his father in the backyard garden in the 1970s. After his father died, John found the rake embedded in a nearby tree. I just really like this picture. And he wrote a story to go with it. So every photo background tells its own story. Bill Stover Sr. and Marie Williams is in this picture in the 1960s inside Stover's Variety Store. Stover's Variety Store was known for selling a little bit of everything. Seen in the background, 620 film and flash bulbs for Instamatic cameras, 45 RPM records, and blue jean iron-on patches. You may still be able to find iron-on patches, but not the camera, the film, the flash bulbs, or the 45 RPM vinyl records. How different were the 60s? This is also a story about Stover's Variety Store in our newsletter, Winter 2023. And this picture with more in the caption is on page 47. What is Luray Caverns? This was the question my editor in South Carolina asked when reviewing the captions. Growing up in the Shenandoah Valley and having never lived anywhere else, it didn't occur to me that my editor wouldn't know what a cavern was. In my mind, everybody knew it was a cave and a registered natural landmark. So I had to explain that to her, and I had to look up the stalagmites and the, so forth. This picture, which is on page 93, is the Sunset Hill school students and chaperones on a field trip to Luray Caverns in 1963. And of course, a lot of students went to the caverns. This picture is the fire engine and the mystery of Slanton's 5 and 10 cent store. The sign across the street, Slanton's 5 and 10 cent store, is a bit of a mystery. It is the same building that housed Rawson's 5 and Dime, Stover's Variety Store, and Barrick's Shoe and Variety Shop. But nobody remembered the Slantons or exactly when they were opened. After several conversations that we had with different people, it is believed to have been operated by Mr. and Mrs. Purdy under the store name of Slantons. But you see, that's a really neat picture. And the caption in the book tells you a little bit more about that. But the fire engine, I think it says Strasburg #1.
Can you take that picture back a second? The gentleman on the right, if I'm not mistaken, is Bill Orndorff, who was a photographer, reporter for the Northern Virginia Daily for many
Yes.
years. And you see he's got the old-time camera and flash thing in his hands.
Yeah, and that is in the caption in the book.
Okay.
Kitty Miller identified Mr. Orndorff. And that helped me to figure out the time frame of when that picture was taken. But then after the book came out, some pictures tell more than one story. So the #1 fire truck, Chad Sherman's parents bought a book at the first book signing. When Chad saw the parade photo of the #1 fire truck, he contacted me because he owns the fire truck. He's evidently been I don't think he's here today, is he? But he's evidently been a volunteer fire department, a volunteer with the fire department for a lot of years. I think it was his great-great-grandfather was captain of the fire department. And I didn't find this out until after the book came out. But he plans to display the truck for the County Heritage Day on April 15th. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that's a picture that was in the newspaper of Chad in front of that truck. And he'll be able to tell the story about how he came to purchase it. The man behind the man. This is John Arts, who owned and managed Arts Esso. It was later Cameron's Exxon and now Handy Mart. His daughter Susie Arts Grimes gave me this picture. Susie says, "You wouldn't believe how many people have asked me who the man is standing behind my dad, and nobody knows. So if anybody recognizes him, please let us know." I don't know if anybody.
I can tell you,
You know who it is?
the girl putting the crown on Becky Steele was
Oh,
Doris
yes.
Blackwell.
Blackwell?
Doris Blackwell.
Okay, I want to write
That was
that
the
down.
future homemakers beauty contest.
Yeah, okay. See, then we can find out more information, the more information that we share. Well, on the back of this picture, all it said was Sally Hupp. And when I saw this picture, I knew which one was Sally because she looks just like her great niece, who is Kelsey Deal Mask. She looks just like her. Kelsey she has a little flower shop called Pedal Pushers. Anyway, I sent this picture to Kelsey, who showed it to her Aunt Sally, who identified two of the other girls for the captions. And this was 1957-58, the Strasburg High School Future Homemakers of America, when they held a beauty contest. I don't think they even call it that anymore. It's got some other name. But back in my day, we had Future Homemakers of America and Future Farmers of America. And they were totally segregated. The boys and girls had different clubs. It's in the book. Yeah. I didn't put all the captions, in here, but I think You said the woman who is crowning, you have her
The
name?
short lady with the black hair that's crowning Becky Steele was the previous year's winner.
Winner.
And it's Doris Blackwell.
Doris. I
I
think
think
I
she was
talked to
from
Miss
Woodstock.
Blackwell, and I was able to get in touch with her, but she couldn't be sure that that was her. So I think I left out her name, but we'll talk about that. So the next slide, I titled this, "You Ain't Just Whistling Mayberry." Police Chief Frank Pangle poses with his catch of the day. He also caught a lot of teasing about fishing on the job as he was jokingly compared to Sheriff Andy Taylor on the Mayberry TV show. The TV show opened with the character Andy walking in his uniform with a fishing pole while the theme song was whistled. This is also on page 126. I got this picture from the Strasburg Police Department. The last day of elementary school, 1968. That was the day the school burned. You can see the newspaper, a little picture of the newspaper on the right. George Hoffman provided this newspaper article from his mother's scrapbook that she had saved all those years. That was in the paper Saturday after the fire. The girl in the white dress that you see there with the bow in her hair is obviously dressed for the graduation ceremony that had to be postponed. We think she is Terry Updike Cook. I talked to Terry about this and she wasn't sure, but Terry was tall and she liked her hairdos. I think she had hairdos a lot like that. So anyway, I was also a 7th grader. This is the SHS class of 1973 and a patrolman that day. You can see the SHA newsletters fall 2010 and winter 2014 for the folk histories about that day. And there's probably 5, maybe 6 pictures of the burning of the school. This one's on page 97, but you can read more about that in the captions. This newspaper article helped me with the captions a lot because there's a lot of information in there. So, small towns have no secrets. It was a small town rumor that this was the real Santa Claus. But the secret's out. Terrell Nicholson solved the mystery. This is really her brother, Steve Manuel. And she told me this after the book came out. Strasburg Police Department provided this photo of town policeman Paul Neal and Roger Ramey, who appear to be about to arrest Santa. And the rest of the story, this is Ralph Stroessnatter in Johnson's grocery store. One day when Jimmy Ferguson was a teenager, he had a rubber snake that looked real. He carried it into Johnson's grocery and laid it on the shelf in the back where Ralph Stroessnatter was cutting meat. Without hesitation, Ralph packed that snake into 6 pieces, as any good butcher would, and handed it back to Jimmy. I was talking to Jimmy about Stover's Variety Store because he used to work there, and that's when he gave me some side stories, and I thought that was really good. And the rest of this story, Strasburg Town Manager Joseph Howard wins a prize. In 1956, Mr. Howard, far right, happened to be the person who bought the 200,000th prescription at People's Drug Store. There were no computers in 1956 to calculate this data, so People's Drug Store must have kept accurate records. The book caption tells more about this, and you can see the newsletter, Winter 2017, for a folk history on People's Drug Store. There's, I think, 3, maybe 4 pictures of People's Drug Store in the book. So there's more to the story of Strasburg. This photo to the right is just one that I would have loved to have included in the book, but I could not get the original photo to scan it in the required format. This is Doc Lawn, the pharmacist at Vaughn's Drugstore. The little boy is Cliff Hupp, son of local photographer Frank Hupp. And you can see the SHA newsletter winner 2015 for the story on Vaughn's Drugstore. Carol Gard-Fogel came to our first book signing. This is just one of the vintage photos she brought us from a family scrapbook. Stinkley Esso Station on Massanutten Street, now Holsinger Exxon. So it's kind of tiny, but that was when the station was first built. I thought that was pretty neat. So, the book tells you more about everything, and every picture in this book tells its own story. These are just a few highlights. I scanned over 200 photos. There are 157 photographs in the book and 127 pages. So I'm just going to conclude, I'm going to read from the introduction in the book, a paragraph. These old photographs only show a fraction of our history and only give a glimpse of what our town is, what it has been, and what it will become. But I think Strasburg will always be a place where people will be proud to call home, where they can walk downtown for an ice cream cone, listen to live music on the town square, and visit with their friends and neighbors. Small towns have no secrets, but they do have a general sense of understanding for their neighbors. So, do we have any questions?
The service station that you just pictured
Uh-huh.
was Lyndon Stickley, he owned it.
Yes, it was Lyndon Stickley. I think she had that written down. Do you have any questions about anything else or anything you want to add to any of the stories?
Kathy, on your picture with the Confederate veterans riding in front of the band,
Yeah?
I'm fairly sure that's related to the Fisher's Hill reunion, because my mama always told us that on the day of the reunion, the Confederate veterans would lead a parade out of town to the Fisher's Hill picnic area.
Oh, that's
I
interesting.
feel sure that's what that was.
So it probably wasn't a regular parade, it was just that there was a parade, what you're saying is from the Fisher's Hill picnics that the Civil War veterans had for many years after the Civil War. And they would have reunions, both the north and the south. So that was probably them parading into town from Fisher's Hill.
Yeah, I think the building is the Bell Pottery House.
You think it's what?
The Bell Pottery House on Queen, the corner of Queen and Fort.
On Green and Fort?
I think so, yeah, because I think that's my old house in the background.
With the chimney?
No, the
Yeah.
one, the one that's, you're looking at the eve.
So Mary says that she believes that is Queen Street, and that was the house that she owned at one time. Was that your mother's house
The
too?
one that's in the background that you see the.
In the background?
Yeah.
And
No,
Mary,
that
the
was,
one on the left was the Mayor Miller's house?
I think that's another house. This is older than Mayor Miller's house.
Okay.
And there's some controversy about Queen Street at one time, we believe was Main Street. And it kind of joined there where the Handy Mart is. And then eventually somehow they closed off that road, and then our current Main Street, which is King Street, became the Main Street. So that would make sense that they would have come in from Fisher's Hill.
Yeah, they would have come up by the church, you know.
The Mount
road
Zion
went
Church?
on. Yeah, by
Mhm.
the Methodist church there, up the hill, past the old water treatment plant.
But that's a real treasure for this, and this was given to me to stand by Ginger Sager Gladdy as
That
well,
was Francis Hoover's.
Oh, it's
from Francis Hoover's collection.
Kathy, if you don't have it, Doc Brickneyer's daughter Karen wrote a narrative a few years back when we went to church out there with them about the Fisher's Hill picnic and what that was all about. And that would be a good thing to get hold of.
Oh, yes, it would be. Yeah. Well, we've done some folk histories on the Fisher's Hill picnics, and we had a program out there one time.
Twice there have been reunions twice.
Reunions out there. But that would be good to have that too, from Doc Rittenhouse's daughter Karen, wrote a history.
We talked about that, was it Hildy Fisher was the gossip? It wasn't Hildy Fisher, it was Doc Rittenhouse.
We used to call Doc the mayor, he was the mayor of Fisher's Hill.
Kathy, about the beauty contest, I know we still have beauty contests, usually in connection to some sort of festival. But in the days of the beauty contest you had a picture of, those were money raisers. The various clubs in the area
Oh, yes.
sponsored beauty contests, and we had to force our students to participate. They were very hesitant, but, you know, we knew that it was a good thing and we needed the money, so
So they were, the beauty contests were
they
fundraisers.
were that and the womanless beauty contest.
Oh, yes, the womanless beauty contest. Was Billy Stover in the womanless beauty contest? Do I remember that?
Yeah, I won twice.
In the same contest?
I won one year, then I crowned Ralph Hollow, and then he crowned me back. It might have been all rigged, I don't know.
And I'm sure those pictures were in the paper too. They were
Yes, they
also
were.
in the paper, yeah.
You didn't submit that.
Oh, the far right is Sally. And when Kelsey showed this to her aunt, she was just thrilled to see that picture. But I knew as soon as I saw that, that was, yeah, that was the one that had to be Sally Huff, because she looks just like Kelsey. Do you have any other questions?